Once again, good morning and welcome. And I have this privilege of introducing Professor Laurie Foster. Professor Laurie Foster is a professor of industrial and organizational psychology at North Carolina State University and University of Cape Town, South Africa. She's a former member of White House Social and Behavioral Sciences, and she's also an advisor she has been an advisor to various United Nations entities. She has held faculty positions at various universities internationally. And she is, of course, a widely published author, and more important, also an advisor she has been an advisor to various United Nations entities. How come someone is echoing my voice? She has held faculty positions at various universities internationally. It is very embarrassing to listen to your own voice again and again. So, can I start on my own? Oh my God. Okay. So, she has been a fellow of American Psychological Association. She's a fellow of Association of Psychological Sciences. And also she was a fellow of SIOP, Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. And one very important thing I wanted to tell you, and I was just skipping, that's the time my voice echo came. She is one of them. I would like all the young psychologists to note, not only she published in refereed top-class journals, but her articles in top-class journals were picked up by popular media because they were of use. And she has been like Wall Street Journal, if I remember correctly. She has been mentioned in many popular media, popular journals, and which actually goes to help people who need help. And that's a very, very important task that she has done. And of course, we have already mentioned that she is the present president of International Association of Applied Psychology. And here to you, Laurie. Please, the forum is yours now, please.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Saswata, for the introduction. And thank you all for the opportunity to be here. It really is an honor. So I'd like to talk today about building a resilient and responsible world. And it looks like we are in good shape with the slides here. So in psychology, we often focus on individuals and groups, but psychology can also be applied more broadly to influence the society in which we live. I have one goal today. I want to convince you of the need for more macro applications of psychology. I want you to consider macro psychology and its importance for building a more responsible and resilient world. So to achieve this aim, let's start by traveling back in time. So think back to the moment in which you decided to major in psychology. When did you first discover psychology? And what was your thought process? How did you decide to specialize in it? For me, it went a little bit like this. I think we're going to get my slides going here. There we go. Thank you. That's perfect. All right, so I met psychology in 1992, and the journey went a little bit like this. I had been at the university for about a year and a half, not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life. That semester, I needed an elective to get up to the required number of credit hours, and I found out that a psychology course was being offered. So I said, why not? I didn't know much about psychology except for what I'd seen in the movies. So in my mind, these are the people that you go to see when you need therapy. That's about the extent of what I knew. So here it is, the spring of 1992. I enroll in the psychology course, and I walk in the room. It's a big lecture hall like this, and the class is already crowded by the time that I walk in. I make my way to an empty seat, and I find out what the semester is going to bring. And it looks like it's going to be a very busy semester. There are papers to write, there are quizzes, there are assignments. One of the assignments that we had was to attend an event that was organized by the psychology department. I go to the event, and the event was arranged like a game. There were 5 people on the stage, and our job as the audience was to figure out which one of them is the psychologist. And we got to ask questions so that we could figure this out. Which one is the psychologist? And we asked them questions, and they answered our questions. And one of them was working on road safety. And one of them was helping people to realize their physical exercise goals. One of them was working with organizations, helping them to determine who to hire and how to hire the best people. And the list went on. So I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, this is a trick. These people all have very interesting jobs, but none of them is a psychologist. So what was I not seeing? What I didn't see is that psychology was much, much broader than I initially realized. And they were all psychologists. So here I'm learning psychology is really, really useful, and it's very, very broad. And I wasn't just intrigued, I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. So this is super interesting. Now, what I was doing at the time is I was continuing my papers, continuing my exams. And one day we're sitting in class and our papers got returned. And I quickly glanced at the top of mine to see what kind of a mark I made. I can't remember now the exact grade, but I remember what the professor wrote up at the top. She said, I hope you'll consider becoming a psychology major. The thought had simply never occurred to me before, but she had planted the seed. Now, that semester, I learned that psychologists had been involved in a lot of different things over the years. I learned about a psychologist called John Blavatsky, who tested a small, inexpensive gadget that ultimately made highway travel much, much safer. The gadget was a third brake light that got mounted at the back of the rear window. And when you press the brake, the third light comes on and the drivers behind you can see that you're stopping and they know to slow down. Just one of many examples. I learned that psychology was being applied all over the world. And I learned that there was even an association called the International Association of Applied Psychology that had been born in 1920 that was an opportunity for psychologists from different parts of the globe to come together, to collaborate, and to learn from one another. I even learned that it had many divisions. It had divisions of organizational psychology. It had divisions focused on assessment and evaluation, on school and education, on societal development, the environment, health, clinical and community psychology, political psychology, economic psychology, so many divisions. What I didn't know at the time is that I would one day become president of that association. But what I did know, and what I could clearly see, is that psychology can be very, very useful. So at the end of the semester, I switched my majors and I began to enroll in more psychology classes. Now, at the time, I was also working to put myself through school, first as a waitress, and then I was working as a clerk at a hospital in a department that was managing the inventory control. So managing the supplies that were coming into and going out of the hospital. The inventory side of the job was pretty easy. The people side was super complicated. There were conflicts and leadership challenges and problems to be sorted out as to who should be doing what, how to manage and evaluate performance. And I quickly saw that these things that I'm learning in the classroom, psychology, can actually be applied, can be used to solve some of these business challenges. So to supplement my major, I decided to minor in business. And this required me to enroll in, among other things, an economics course. Now, I had a choice between macroeconomics and microeconomics, and somehow I landed in microeconomics. So here I am in microeconomics, and I'm realizing that we are once again talking about my favorite topic: human judgment, human decision-making, and human behavior. And again, I was hooked. But what I discovered is that there were both synergies and inconsistencies between what I was learning in my psychology courses and what I was learning in the economics course. In the economics course, human beings made so much more sense. They were creatures who would take in all of the information, they would weigh the advantages and the disadvantages, and then they would carefully make a decision that would be in their long-term best interests. That's who I was learning about in my economics course. In the psychology studies, the picture was more complex. And the difference I would learn much later in life is the difference between what's sometimes referred to as Homo economicus versus Homo sapien. The Homo economicus is this mythical creature who is hyper-rational, who always optimizes, always takes in all of the information and makes decisions in her or his best interest. Homo sapiens, that's me, that's you, imperfect decision makers. A great deal of classical economic theory and far too many policies are designed not for Homo sapien, but for Homo economicus. And that's something that we think needs to change. Now, my enthusiasm for economics was not lost on my econ professor. And he said, maybe you should consider switching your major to economics. And I thought about it, and I must admit, I dearly loved Homo economicus. So clear-cut, so straightforward, made so much sense. But Homo economicus didn't quite track with the realities that I was seeing in my workplace, in my classrooms, and in my daily life. So in the end, I chose to major in psychology, and the rest is history. Now, what I didn't realize at the time is that as useful as psychology is, and it is very useful, it's not as used as perhaps it should be. Historically, I'd say psychology hasn't been applied as strategically or as systematically as it could be to achieve impact at scale. And this is where economists seem to have a leg up. For years, insights from economists have driven policymakers, and solutions to more macro level challenges. Economists are commonly involved in decision-making at higher levels in government and the like. They typically have a seat at the policymaking table. And as a result, fields like economics have a big influence over public policy. I would argue that it's time for psychology to also have a role in that larger conversation in the policymaking decisions. Now, Mac McLachlan and Joanne McVeigh published a book in 2021, not too long ago, on macro psychology. And they define macro psychology as follows. It's the application of psychology to factors that influence the settings and conditions of our lives. Settings and conditions refer to the broader social and physical environment and the context in which we live. Psychological thought both influences and is influenced by these settings and these conditions. Now, they would argue, McLachlan and McVeigh, that macropsychology is not a subdiscipline, but rather it's a perspective within psychology, and one that perhaps we should consider adopting along with our usual perspective that we take. It seeks to bring this macro perspective to other levels of psychological thought. And if needed, I would say, to inform public policy, to scale up our insights, and to help build a more responsible and a more resilient world. So, since those years that I first decided to major in psychology, a lot's happened. So let me fast forward a bit and focus on a few key insights. So 2002, here's Daniel Kahneman, one of the scholars that I was reading about when I was majoring in psychology. I remember he and his research partner, Amos Tversky, had a big article at the time in American Psychologists on heuristics and judgment and decision-making and biases, and they talked about loss aversion and whatnot. And here he is 10 years later, winning the Nobel Prize in economics. His research partner had sadly passed away, Amos Tversky, but Kahneman won the Nobel Prize. And if you're interested in their work and even the relationship between these two scholars, there's a really good book written by Michael Lewis called The Undoing Project. It talks about the friendship between these two men and their scholarship as well. But here it is, a psychologist winning the Nobel Prize in economic sciences. Now, if you talk to Danny Kahneman, he'll tell you too that he's never even taken a course in economics before. But here he is winning the Nobel Prize. And that was pretty exciting. Now let's fast forward a bit more. 2006, here's Michael Friese. So he was the president of the International Association of Applied Psychologists prior to myself. In 2006, he gave an address at the opening of the ICAP. So this was the 26th International Congress of Applied Psychology in Athens, Greece. And the title of his talk was rather provocative. His title was, "What if applied psychology mattered in this world?" Now, I think he was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but here's what he had to say in that talk. He said, quote, "My general thesis is, applied psychology matters because it is doing fabulous research. However, we are not good at translating this research into policies and to implement those policies. It is the translation from good research and good practice into effective policies that applied psychology can improve. I want applied psychology to play a bigger role in the world," end quote. So this is what Michael Friese had to say back in 2006. And he actually pointed to 3 other groups outside of psychology that he felt were probably having a bigger impact on policy. One of them was pseudoscience. I mean, he wasn't kidding. You know, it can often have a big influence on policy. I think back in 2006, we were less likely to use terms like misinformation and fake news, but that might also be kind of in that ballpark, having an effect on policy. Number 2, he pointed to medicine having a fairly large influence on policy. And number 3, he pointed to the field of economics. And he said, here are these other groups that are having a big effect. And I don't think he had any notion of edging them out. But what about the insights, the theories, the methods from psychology? Where are they? And it was really food for thought. And I think it got a lot of us thinking. He also had a very funny image in his presentation that I'll share with you. So on the one hand, he showed the then president of the United States swearing in the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. And then he also showed a rather humorous vision for the future. And he said, this is what we need to see. He said, we need to see the president swearing in his Council of Psychological Advisors. Well, it hadn't happened yet, but a guy can always dream, right? So now fast forward a couple of years, 2008, the book Nudge is published. And Nudge is probably popularized these terms Homo economicus and Homo sapien that I was mentioning not too long ago. This was written by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. And the book was based largely on the work of Kahneman and Tversky. So basically took what we knew about these biases and these heuristics, and it said, what if we become choice architects? And what if we design decision environments, not for Homo economicus, but what if we design decision environments for Homo sapien so that we can empower and enable people to make better and healthier choices? And there were lots of examples that they give in the book. Probably the most classic example is the one of the cafeteria. So simply reorganizing the way food is presented in the cafeteria so that the healthy options are more visible and more easily accessible can encourage people to take those healthier options. And their notion is that this can be done without removing anyone's freedom of action. So it still gives people the full freedom to choose what they want, in this case, what they want to eat, but it does nudge people in one direction or another. So just like an architect has their bag of tools and lays out a blueprint for a physical environment, a choice architect can do the same for a decision environment. So those are some of the tenets from that book. So now let's go up to 2010, 2 years later, and we're beginning to see these ideas take hold in policy circles. then David Cameron in the UK. I think he had met Richard Thaler at a wedding and got to talking and understood this concept of nudge and said, hey, we could probably use this in government. So in 2010, the UK's Behavioral Insights team was born. This was the first ever nudge unit in government. And this is where psychologists and economists came together to apply behavioral insights methods and theories to design policies. Their approach was to, and they said that they had 3 goals. One was make public services more cost-effective and easier for citizens to use. Number 2 was to improve outcomes by introducing a more realistic model of human behavior to policy wherever possible. And number 3, to enable people to make better choices for themselves. All right. So now let's go up to 2014. Now, I don't know Daniel Kahneman very well, but he was nice enough to sit down with me for a little while around 2014. And we were talking about a lot of the issues that we're talking about in here today. And at the time he said, you don't know it yet, but there's also going to be a social and behavioral sciences team in Washington. And you should go and check it out and you can tell them that I sent you. So I went to Washington, and this was around the early days, the beginnings of the Obama White House's social and behavioral sciences team. So I was on the team for 2 years, and we were doing similar things to what the UK's Behavioral Insights team was doing, taking psychological methods, taking psychological theories, and applying them across the different government agencies. So the Department of Labor, the Department of Education, Energy, Environment. Our theories and our methods can be useful in so many different contexts, and we were applying them broadly. And you can see the tagline here in the picture: we believe that government works best when it's built for people. So I've got a little video. If I can get it to work, I'll show you just a little snippet of this team in action. All right, this one. Okay, right there.
Welcome to the West Week, your guide to everything that's happening at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. This week, the president spent time with scientists.
I should let you know, we have a few spots open on the team, so very interesting.
Letter writers.
Have a great wedding.
Immigration, healthcare, and education advocates.
Get to work. Yep.
Spiritual leaders, athletes, and dreamers.
Thank you, brother.
That's January 30th to February 5th, or to all the dreamers. On Science Friday, the president surrounded himself with medical experts and announced new historic investments in the field of precision medicine.
You can match a blood transfusion to a blood type. That was an important discovery. What if matching a cancer cure to our genetic code was just as easy, just as standard? And that's the promise of precision medicine, delivering the right treatments at the right time, every time, to the right person. And for a small but growing number of patients, that future is already here.
In the afternoon, the president met with the social and behavioral sciences team, the first ever team of research experts recruited into the government to harness behavioral science insights.
We're working off OMB's larger push for evidence-based policy. So I think the extent to which we can insert evidence into some of your cabinet meetings, conversations with different secretaries.
I'm always big on evidence. I'm big on facts. I'm a very rational person.
On Super Bowl Sunday, the president did a pregame interview.
Oh, let me pause it there. So that's a little bit of the team in action, and there are a few different things I want to point out about that video. Start my slideshow back up. One is, and my slides might kick in a minute. Yes, we invited him to join our team, and yes, he turned us down. He said he was too busy. I don't know why. So that was number one. Number two is what you'll hear in that video is this social and behavioral science insights were being discussed in the very same breath as precision medicine. So now all of a sudden we are seeing these insights being taken, I think, quite seriously. And then number three, when I look at this picture, I do see a very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary team. So I see people with backgrounds in cognitive psychology, neuroscience, social psychology, organizational psychology, economics, medicine, law, international development, just in this picture right here. And we're each bringing with us our theories and our methods to share with one another and to share with the government. All right. What happened then in 2015 was the president wrote and signed an executive order. And this is an executive order that was directing the agencies to make greater and better use of behavioral insights across the federal government. And I won't read the whole thing to you, but I'll read the first couple of lines. It says, a growing body of evidence demonstrates that behavioral science insights, research insights findings from fields such as behavioral economics and psychology about how people make decisions and act on them can be used to design government policies to better serve the American people. So really exciting to see the word psychology appear for the first time in a presidential executive order. And so maybe Michael Freese's dream was realized to some extent, right? Now, the US's social and behavioral sciences team, as you know, wasn't the first, and it certainly wasn't the last. This map is somewhat old. This was from 2018, so there's more behavioral insights teams that exist now than it did at the time. I just haven't found an updated map. But what I want you to see is not the details, but rather the breadth of coverage here. So what you're seeing is in pink, in green, and in blue. In pink, we've tagged institutions inside government that are applying behavioral insights. In green, it's institutions outside of government, and in blue is multinational organizations such as the United Nations. So you can see that even by 2018, when this map was created, behavioral insights units and teams were beginning to take hold in various forms. Now up to 2016, so this was an exciting point in time because this is the point at which the United Nations established its Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll talk a little bit more about these goals in the lecture that I'm giving tomorrow evening. Some of you are familiar with them. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals in all, and they range everything from no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, which includes mental health, of course, quality education, all the way down to goal number 17, which is partnerships for the goals. And these goals were established in 2015, and they took hold in 2016. They're sometimes referred to as Agenda 2030 because they are set for 15 years to expire in 2030. Sometimes they're simply called the global goals, but they really are focused on the concept of sustainable development. And I'm underscoring the word sustainable because in order for development to occur and to sustain or maintain over time, we're needing to pay attention not just to the economic factors, which are very important, but also these other factors that are influenced by and that influence the economic factors. Sometimes the UN refers to these as the 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. I wrote an article recently called The 6th P. And if you've been listening to this talk, I bet you can guess what that 6th P might be. People, planet, prosperity, peace, partnerships, and psychology. Because I think psychology has got a big role to play in achieving these particular aims. What's interesting about them is that they're intertwined in a way that's both good and challenging. You know, sometimes you can figure out a way to intervene on one of these goals, but it might be at the expense of another goal. And that's not the point, right? We're looking for win-win solutions where you can impact on each of these goals and create the balance that's needed for development to be maintained or sustained. So 2016 was an exciting time because here's this agenda. And not only are there 17 goals, but there are sub-goals or targets underneath these 17 goals. And those are even more specific. When you look at these targets, these sub-goals, you'll find that many of them are very behavioral in nature. In order to achieve these 17 things, to some extent, we're going to need to change behavior. Here's a couple of examples. So I've taken goal number 4 and I've taken goal number 8 just to show you what some of these targets look like. Goal number 4 is quality education, ensuring inclusive, equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning and opportunities for all. There are 10 targets or sub-goals underneath it. Target 4.4 is to substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship. Meanwhile, goal number 8, decent work, has 12 targets. Target 8.3 is to promote development-oriented policies that support productive activities, decent job creation, entrepreneurship, creativity and innovation, and encourage the formalization and growth of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, including through access to financial services. I was excited to see that there are sessions on entrepreneurship on the agenda on the program for this weekend's conference as well. So here's an opportunity, right, for behavioral insights for psychology to speak to some of these goals, to some of these targets. And psychologists have been quite involved in studying entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship over the years. One study that I like, I'll highlight here, was from Michael Friese. And this one got published in Science a few years ago, maybe around 2017 or so. And what he did was he designed an entrepreneurial training program using our theories and using our methods. And he said, what if training entrepreneurs the usual way, which is here's how to do accounting and here's how to develop a business plan. What if we trained them using what we know about psychology, about goal setting and self-efficacy and whatnot? So he did just that. He designed a psychologically informed entrepreneurship program that was focused on what he calls personal initiative. And the program is teaching entrepreneurs, small business owners, about becoming self-starting, about becoming future-oriented, and about overcoming barriers. It's very psychological in nature. And it touches on things like goal setting and plan making. It has embedded in there commitment devices, which are often used in the field of behavioral economics. And several days in length, and it teaches these entrepreneurs to develop this personal initiative, this entrepreneurial mindset. But Michael wasn't satisfied with just that. He said, let's really put this to the test and let's see if it works or if it doesn't. And so what he did was he partnered with economists at the World Bank, and they designed a field experiment where they had 1,500 entrepreneurs, this was in Togo, and they randomly assigned them to either the psychologically informed personal initiative entrepreneurship program, number one. Number two was the more traditional entrepreneurship program called the Business Edge, which taught them accounting and finances and business plans and whatnot. And then number three was a control group, a waitlisted control group, I believe. And then they followed these entrepreneurs for 2 years to see, were they staying in business, were they turning profits and whatnot. And what they ultimately found was that the psychologically informed entrepreneurship program was more effective with respect to keeping people in business and with respect to promoting their profitability. So really strong evidence in favor of using psychology for some of these global sustainable development goals. This, of course, speaks to goal number 4, as well as goal number 8, because as we saw a moment ago, embedded underneath those goals, there are aims toward entrepreneurship. It also speaks, it might be less obvious, to goal number 5, which is gender equalities, because it turns out that many of these more traditional entrepreneurship programs tend to be more effective for men than for women, whereas the psychologically informed program was just as effective for men versus women. So it was a way to, again, lift up and raise up both members of the male and the female population. So now we're up to 2016. We're quickly getting up to present day. And this was a report that was published on the very last day of 2016. And this was a quote from Ban Ki-moon, who at this point is now clearly on board with behavioral insights. He says, in order to succeed, Agenda 2030 must account for behavioral insights research. Our organization, our global agenda, and most importantly, the people worldwide they are intended to serve deserve nothing less than the best science available. A human-centered agenda requires a rigorous research-based understanding of people, end quote. That was definitely music to my ears. Now, 2016 was an interesting year for me because at that point, Ban Ki-moon had taken notice of behavioral insights, and he had asked myself and one of my team members to start coming over from Washington, D.C. to New York to begin exploring what behavioral science would look like in the UN context. And that was a lot of fun and very interesting to see and to be able to apply it in that way. It was also bittersweet because 2016 was the last year of Ban Ki-moon's 2 terms. And so by the end of this year, I started wondering, will the next Secretary General be as enthusiastic time will tell. 2017, Richard Thaler, co-author of the book Nudge, also wins a Nobel Prize for his groundbreaking work. And I thought the article was interesting. The tagline says, an economist who recognizes that human behavior is not always strictly rational. And I think we've known that for a while, but it's good now for that to be elevated and to begin seeping into policy. 2020, it became even clearer to me that the new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, was keenly aware and appreciative of the value of behavioral science, of psychology and behavioral insights in the UN context. He's in the middle of his 5-year term, and he begins to make this a leadership priority. I remember him calling a meeting of his senior management group. And this is a group that includes the head of UNICEF and the head of UNDP and other such agencies. And he called them together to have a meeting specifically on behavioral science and what's happening and what could be happening in the UN context. In 2021, he released a guidance note. So this is kind of similar to the Obama executive order. So Obama was directing his agencies to make greater use of behavioral science. Guterres was directing the different agencies, missions, and funds to do the same, saying, hey, this can be really useful. I think I've got a little video of Guterres speaking to this point that I'll show to you as well.
Effective institutions need to be nimble and dynamic, constantly evolving to keep pace with the complex and changing world. In that spirit, I'm pleased to share a new guidance note on behavioral science, a tool that will improve.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of feedback up here. Can you? Otherwise, we can skip it.
The way we fulfill our mandates and administer.
It's okay. I can kind of summarize a little bit what you said, and I've got a quote from him here. So let's go like this. Just go right back up here. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. The video was essentially Antonio Guterres' perspective on embedding behavioral insights more widely and more broadly into the UN context. And he talks about it in two different ways. One is how to use behavioral science to help achieve things like the Sustainable Development Goals. And he also discusses the use of behavioral science to improve the UN as an organization, so applying it internally as well. Here is an excerpt, a snippet from the guidance note. He says, in many areas, the delivery of the UN's mandates is linked to changing human behavior. Behavioral science refers to an evidence-based understanding of how people actually behave, make decisions, and respond to programs, policies, and incentives. It enables us to diagnose barriers preventing people from adopting a certain behavior, understanding enablers that help people achieve their aims, and design more impactful interventions. And so, since the development of that guidance note, I might need a little help advancing slides there. And we've seen different UN agencies take this up in various ways. Here is an example from UNICEF. They developed an entire lab around this. They called it the BIRD Lab, Behavioral Insights Research and Design. And they began implementing projects all over the world, utilizing psychological methods, psychological theories, as well as hiring some leadership positions with expertise in behavioral science. Finally, as we near the end, I'll talk about macro psychology. So that's where we started, right? In 2021, a book called Macro Psychology, A Population Science for Sustainable Goals was published. And I certainly recommend it for those who are interested in this topic, but it discusses the idea of not just using our science for individual projects and individual people, but actually thinking through this lens of policy and how do we apply this and scale it up for even greater impact. 2022. So 2022, there was an interesting article that was written by Jackie Cranny and her colleagues, so a group of scholars from the UK, from Australia, from the United States, called Psychological Literacy and Undergraduate Psychology Education, an International Provocation. And what they propose in this article, and they are following through on it, is an international committee on undergraduate psychology outcomes. They said, in this day and age in which we live, a day and age of conflict and misinformation, et cetera, we need to actually enhance psychological literacy, not just within ourselves and not just for our students, but for the public at large, so that we can be more discerning consumers of information, among other things. And they propose taking a look at the psychology curriculum worldwide and saying, are we really designing our curricula and are we really preparing our undergraduate students to become psychologically literate leaders of tomorrow? Maybe there are improvements that we can even make. So they have assembled this group of scholars who are working as we speak to take a close look at curricula and perhaps make some recommendations to improve psychological literacy. They end the article on this note, quote, imagine a future where the general public and governments understand and highly value the discipline and profession of psychology because of the contributions of these psychology graduates. These are outcomes worth striving for, end quote. So it'll be interesting to see, I think, in the days to come, how that committee concludes and what they conclude. And finally, I'll end on this slide. So now we're up to the present day. So we've gone from 1992 to 2023. And here we are. Here we are at the annual convention of the National Academy of Psychology. And having looked at the program, I'm blown away by how applied and useful the various projects are that are on the program. And I'm excited to hear more of the talks and look at the posters and the presentations. So many that have an opportunity to improve the world in which we live, to make it a more responsible and a more resilient world. From the website, the concern towards building a resilient and responsible world is amplified as human societies worldwide are confronted by a pandemic, by conflict, climate change, which have economic, social, and psychological consequences that challenge the SDGs adopted by the UN. These challenges require profound behavior changes for adaptation and mitigation, end quote. They require profound behavior changes, and I would argue that they also require us to scale up our science, to take a more macro view in addition to what we're already doing. And I think the way has been paved. Look at these miles markers that we've seen that I've presented today. The way has been paved for us to influence policy, for us to scale up our impact. And I think it's up to us as a community to take that opportunity and to run with it. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.